No alphabet, no wheels, no currency, and yet this empire fed, counted, and governed more people than any nation in the history of the Americas. Stretch your mind across a continent, not a country, a continent. From the mountains of modern Colombia to the deserts of Chile, one government kept track of every household, every harvest, every road. Historians call it the Inca Empire. The Inca called it Tawantinsuyu, the four parts united. Here's the problem. Every empire you've heard of ran on writing. Rome had contracts, Egypt had scrolls, China had bureaucrats trained for years to read and record. The Inca had none of that. No written language, no wheeled carts to move grain, no coins to pay a debt or collect a tax. So how do you run an empire of 10 million people with none of the tools every other empire depended on? This isn't really a story about the Inca, it's a story about information, how you move it, store it, and trust it when the usual method isn't available to you. Every large civilization has had to solve that problem. Most solved it with ink. The Inca solved it with string. Picture a length of cord, roughly the thickness of your thumb, with dozens of thinner cords hanging off it like a mop head. Each thinner cord carries knots. The knots have positions. The positions have values. This device is called a khipu, and it was the empire's memory. A khipu could record a census. It could record a granary's contents down to the last sack of maize. It could record who owed labor to the state, and for how many days. The knots followed a base 10 counting system, tied at specific heights on the cord to represent units, tens, and hundreds. Move a knot one notch, and the number changes. Get it wrong, and a village either starves or gets accused of hiding grain. The anthropologist Gary Urton spent decades trying to crack this system fully. His research at Harvard's khipu database project found that khipu weren't just numbers. Color, chord direction, and knot type may have encoded categories of information too. Not just how much, but what kind, and belonging to whom. We still haven't decoded all of it. Think about that. A recording system so dense that modern scholars, with computers and centuries of accumulated knowledge, still can't read every layer of what it says. Now, a khipu sitting in a warehouse is useless unless it can travel. So the Inca built the second half of the machine, the road. The Inca road network stretched an estimated 25,000 miles, cutting through some of the most brutal terrain on Earth. Mountain passes above 15,000 feet, desert stretches with no water for days. The archaeologist John Hislop, who spent years mapping these routes on foot, documented staircases carved directly into cliff faces and suspension bridges woven from grass fiber, rebuilt every year by local communities as part of their labor obligation to the state. Along this road, every few miles, stood a relay station. A runner called a chasqui waited there, rested, alert, ready. When a message arrived, spoken or bound into a khipu, the chasqui memorized it or took the cord and ran, full sprint for a few miles to the next station, then handed it off. A message that would take a horse-riding courier in Europe weeks to deliver could cross the length of the Inca road system in about a week, using nothing but human legs and a relay system. Fresh fish from the Pacific coast could reach the Inca ruler in the mountain capital of Cusco while it was still edible. No wheels, no horses. The Andes had none suited to the terrain, just organization, and a system precise enough that everyone in it knew exactly where to stand and when to run. But a system this good needs people running it who are never mentioned in the postcards. Meet the khipucamayoc, the keeper of the knots. This wasn't a casual role. It was a specialized profession, trained for years, often passed down within families, and it required something most administrative jobs never demand: near-perfect memory paired with near-perfect honesty. A khipucamayoc didn't just tie the knots. They had to be able to explain months later exactly what every knot meant, out loud, to an official who couldn't read the cord themselves. The historian Terence D'Altroy, who studied Inca political economy in depth, described a system where local officials called courier managed labor obligations for their communities, and khipucamayoc tracked exactly how those obligations were fulfilled. This is how the Inca collected what amounted to taxes, not in coins because there were none, but in labor. Days worked, roads built, crops grown for state granaries. It was called the meter system, and the khipu was its ledger. Every household owed time, not money. and someone, somewhere, had to keep count of whose time was owed, whose time was paid, and whose granary held the reserves for the next famine or war. Here's where the fragility creeps in. This entire empire, roads, granaries, census, labor, ran through a relatively small number of trained specialists and a physical network of cords and runners. There was no backup written record, no archive in a second language, no redundancy the way a modern bureaucracy might build in, which means the machine was only as strong as its weakest link, the road that could be cut, the khipucamayoc who could be killed, the relay station that could be burned. And in 1532, that weak link was tested directly. Spanish forces under Francisco Pizarro arrived during a civil war, already tearing at the empire's leadership. They captured the Inca ruler Atahualpa. Within years, khipucamayoc were dying, roads were falling into disrepair, and the knowledge encoded in thousands of khipu began vanishing along with the people trained to read them. Spanish chroniclers, some of them stunned by what they were dismantling, wrote down testimony from surviving khipucamayoc, trying to preserve fragments of a system they didn't fully understand and had already broken. The empire that had run a continent without a single written word collapsed in large part because its entire administrative memory lived inside people and cords that could be destroyed and never rebuilt. So this explains something bigger than one collapsed empire. It shows you that writing was never actually the requirement for complex civilization. Trust, training, and a working network were the requirement. Writing was just one way to get there. The Inca found another. Every system you rely on today, your bank's records, your government census, the app that tracks your deliveries, is running its own version of this same problem. How do you store trust in something that isn't a person and keep it alive when the people who understand it are gone? You've never had to think about it until the day it stops.